lot of videos in this case that set out to cast a wide net and talk about the case as a whole. The goal that I have in this video is to take one discrete issue, the issue of where I believe Maura was going when she crashed, and to focus on that issue and to present and show all of the evidence that I have that supports my theory. The reason why I wanted to focus on this issue first is because I think it's missed in a lot of the podcasts and discussions. I'm not really sure why, but I've noticed that people do gravitate towards a podcast format. And so I think that maybe if I present it this way, that it will translate better. And along with visuals, it will accompany the audio. The first point that I really need to stress is that, according to Fred Murray, Maura was not familiar with Route 112 in the area where she crashed.
Maura drove from University of Mass in a car that was going to go to the junkyard at the end of the week when I was going to replace it with a new car. And she drove to New Hampshire in an area that she had never been before, had an accident on about a 110-degree turn, and basically has never been seen since.
And that was in Woodsville, and that's a part of Haverhill.
Haverhill, New Hampshire.
One of the villages there.
On Route 112, which is a state highway, which means it's patrolled by the state police, but it's also the road that turns into the Kankamangas Highway further down once you pass Lincoln. And that is where Maura and I and the whole family used to camp every summer. And we went there maybe 3 or 4 times a year, the general area, to climb mountains. Sometimes we'd camp, sometimes we'd stay in a motel, depending on what season it was. Maura wasn't familiar with that area, but she was very familiar with 112 further down, and that's what she was doing in the area, I'm sure.
Route 112 used to be 2 distinct state highways or roads. They used to be separate roads that were later connected and then turned into Route 112. When I would go to New Hampshire, and when I continue to go to New Hampshire, up until this year, because of COVID-19, I would do a yearly trip where we would have like 2 townhouses that were connected. And I would go there with my siblings and my nieces and nephews, and it's a really nice thing to do for a couple of days. This last year, I was actually in a townhouse that overlooked Route 112. Again, the Kankamangas section. And it's very touristy when you first get off the highway, off of Route 93. So you basically get off of Route 93, and you see a lot of people walking around. You see a McDonald's and gas station and phone reception, by the way. In my experience, as long as I can remember, as long as I've had a cell phone, has worked fine in that area. I mean, as you get further away from Route 112 up to the townhouses, it kind of dwindles out. But as long as I can remember, the reception has worked fine on that section of 112. So you have to think about it this way. Maura being unfamiliar with the section of Route 112 where she crashed had a certain perception in her mind, we can assume, based on the Kankamangas. My theory is that at some point, either late at night on February 8th, or in the early morning hours of February 9th, Maura got the idea that she wanted, for whatever reason, to go away. And so she started thinking about where she wanted to go. It was reported in the Patriot Ledger that Maura looked up driving directions to the Berkshires in Burlington, Vermont, just after midnight on going into February 9th. So my theory is that at that point, Maura was considering where she wanted to go. She knew she wanted to go somewhere. She hadn't picked a specific destination yet, so she was looking up driving directions from Amherst to see how long it would take for her to get to these places, to weigh the pros and cons. Now, Maura then, the next day on into the day on February 9th, made a few calls that suggest she was still looking and considering different places. She called Linda Salamone, who owned a condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire. And she called 1-800-GO-STOW and got a recorded line that discussed different places that she could stay. And I'm going to play this clip, but it's Garinza from the Disappeared series, where he talks about Maura's computer searches. And this is the important part.
We had an opportunity to look at some of the files on her computer. She had looked at some sites specific to rental properties in the White Mountains region of New Hampshire. She finished up working on her computer at about 4 a.m.
Maura continues her online search the next day.
It appears she got back on her computer on the afternoon of the night, and during the course of a couple hours, searched several sites to include getting directions from Amherst, Mass. To the Burlington, Vermont area.
So Garinza said she finished up after a couple of hours. So we have to assume that maybe around 2 or 2:30 she looked up the driving directions from Amherst, Mass. To Burlington, and then she got off her computer. And then she went to the liquor store and the ATM. She returned to campus, and then she left around 4:30. And so it seems, and this is my theory, that she had decided on going to Burlington, Vermont. This is really well supported by the fact that she had driving directions to Burlington, Vermont in her car, the MapQuest directions. So the very directions that Maura looked up at 2 or 2:30 on the day she went missing were in her car when she crashed. There was a report by Mary Beth Conway in the Whitman Hansen article or series that she wrote on Maura, where Mary Beth Conway reported that there were 2 sets of driving directions. One was to Stowe and one was to Burlington. But ultimately, I ended up emailing Helena, who was Fred Murray's second cousin's wife. And she was the spokesperson for the family for many years. She passed away. But I emailed her and asked her specifically whether Mary Beth Conway's reporting of 2 sets of directions was accurate. And I said in the email, what confused me was every other source I found only mentioned the Burlington directions. So Helena emailed me back and said that, to her knowledge, there were only the directions to Burlington, but that Maura did call GO-STOW. So she seems to be implying that Mary Beth Conway may have confused the call to GO-STOW with driving directions. So this all leads me to conclude that the very last thing Maura did on the computer was look up driving directions to Burlington. Only one set of directions was found in Maura's car. Those were to Burlington. So I have to conclude that Maura wanted to go to Burlington when she left UMass. Now, usually when I post this on Reddit, people will say, yeah, but her car wasn't found anywhere near Burlington. And her car wasn't found anywhere near Burlington. So I didn't know, I couldn't answer that next part until looking at the car inventory, I saw that Maura had a Vermont attractions map in her car. I found one on eBay. It's the 2003 version, which is the one I believe that Maura had, because we know that Maura went to Burlington October of 2003. It was the Columbus Day. We don't know of any trip that she took to Vermont in 2004. So I got the 2003 version of the Vermont attractions map on eBay. It actually shows the exit that Maura got off the highway on Route 91, and it shows that it takes you to Route 112 in New Hampshire. So my theory is simply this. Maura's driving. At first, she plans to go to Burlington. She then encounters one of 2 obstacles. Either she misses the Route 89 exit, or she consciously decides maybe her car's not running too well. And so she consciously decides, you know what, I'm not going to go to Burlington. I'm going to go to Route 112 in New Hampshire. I see it right on the map. I see that I can get there by taking exit 17. So I'll go there. Now, going back to what I had said earlier about how Maura was familiar with the Kankamangas. According to Fred, she didn't know the area where she crashed. I have to think that Maura believed that she'd get off the highway and she'd see a similar setting that you would see if you got off the Kankamangas off of Route 93, where she would get off and there would be hotels, there would be people walking around, McDonald's, like, that she'd have cell service, all of that. So it was kind of like, okay, this is a safe place I can go. I can find a hotel, find something for cheap. And Fred Murray said that he thinks that she was headed to the Kankamangas too. So the reason why I don't think that Maura planned to get off of exit 17, her presumed exit, I should say. We don't know for a fact, but that's her presumed exit. The reason why I don't think she planned to get off that exit when she left school is, number one, I have my theory that she was going to Burlington, or she intended to go to Burlington when she left school. But even if I didn't have that theory, if you look up driving directions on MapQuest, which is the site she used, and I put in McDonald's as the end location, so I put in from UMass to the McDonald's on Main Street in Lincoln, New Hampshire. 2 routes are provided. One route has you get off the highway much earlier, and the second route doesn't have you take I-91 at all. By looking up driving directions, Maura would not have been given a route to get off exit 17 if she had been going to the Kankamangas. Now, there's no evidence at all that Maura would have wanted to go anywhere that was closer than the eastern part of Route 112. She wasn't familiar with that area. She didn't look up anything that was in that area, so I have to think that I have to agree with Fred that she intended to go east. That's all explained by my theory, that she changed her mind based on car trouble, looked at the Vermont attractions map, saw that she could take exit 17 to get to Route 112, because she thought if she got off exit 17 onto Route and made her way to Route 112, that she would basically be in an area where she had cell service, where there were hotels, where she could just, find a cheap hotel for the night, and then figure out what she was going to do after that.